The night was unusually quiet. The kind of silence that feels alive, breathing, waiting, listening. A soft mist hung over the winding road, curling around the tall pine trees that lined its edges. The moon was hidden behind thick clouds, leaving only the dim glow of a flickering streetlight to guide the way. A lone traveler walked slowly along the gravel path, his shoes crunching softly against the stones. He carried a small brown bag over his shoulder, the kind that had seen too many roads and too few destinations. His car had broken down miles behind him, its engine dying somewhere between two nameless villages. With no signal on his phone and no sound of passing vehicles, he had chosen to keep walking, hoping to find a town, a house, maybe even a motel. But for hours, there was nothing. Just the fog, the cold air, and the faint whisper of the wind. His name was Daniel, though no one had called him that in weeks. He was used to being alone now, moving from place to place, searching for quiet corners where he could rest and forget the noise of the world. Yet tonight, even the silence felt heavy. It pressed against his chest, as if the air itself didn't want him there. Then, out of the mist, he saw something. A faint golden light flickering in the distance, low, warm, and almost dreamlike. For a moment he thought it was his imagination, another trick of the fog. But as he walked closer, the shape of a building began to emerge. It stood tall, dark, and oddly elegant. Old wooden beams framed the structure, and long curtains moved gently behind dusty windows. A faint creak echoed in the air, the sound of a hanging sign swinging in the wind. Daniel stopped, squinting to read the letters carved into the wood. It said, "Hotel of Sleep." He let out a tired laugh. What a strange name, he whispered to himself. But the thought of warmth, of a bed, a light, and a roof, was too tempting to question. He adjusted his bag and walked up the stone steps. The front door was heavy and old, its surface covered in faded carvings. He hesitated for a second, then pushed it open. A bell above the door gave a soft metallic chime. Inside, the air was warmer but smelled of dust, old books, and candle wax. The light came from a single chandelier, its glass pieces trembling slightly as if shivering in the stillness. The lobby was small but oddly beautiful. Dark red wallpaper covered the walls, and portraits of unfamiliar faces hung in golden frames. They looked almost real, eyes that seemed to follow him as he walked in. "Hello," Daniel called out softly. No answer. He took a few cautious steps forward. The wooden floor creaked beneath his boots, echoing through the empty hall. Somewhere in the distance, a grandfather clock ticked slowly, each tick sounding louder than the last. Then, from behind the counter, a figure moved. An old man rose from a chair, his face half hidden in the candlelight. He wore a dark vest and a strange expression, not exactly a smile, but not unfriendly either. "Good evening," the man said quietly. His voice was calm, almost sleepy. "Are you looking for a room?" Daniel nodded, grateful to finally see another person. "Yes, please. My car broke down a few miles back. I just need a place to rest for the night." The old man tilted his head, as though studying Daniel's face for a moment longer than necessary. Finally, he turned to the wall behind him where several old keys hung on rusty hooks. He took one, an antique brass key with a small tag engraved with the number 9. He placed it gently on the counter. "Room 9, he said. "Second floor, last door at the end of the hall." Daniel reached for his wallet. "How much for the night?" The old man slowly shook his head. "Payment is not necessary. You look tired. Get some rest. Everything else can wait until morning." Daniel frowned slightly. "That's very kind of you." The old man gave a slow, knowing nod. Then, as Daniel turned to go upstairs, the man's voice floated through the dim light, soft, almost like a lullaby. "Rest well, traveler," he said. "And don't wake too soon." Daniel stopped mid-step, turning his head slightly. But the old man had already sat down again, staring quietly at the flickering candle beside him. The words echoed in Daniel's mind as he climbed the creaking stairs. "Don't wake too soon." He told himself it was just a strange expression, maybe the man's way of wishing him good night. Still, something about it lingered, unsettling and unclear. Outside, the fog thickened. The wind whispered through the cracks of the old hotel walls. And somewhere far off, a clock struck midnight. The traveler had finally found a place to sleep. But the night had only just begun. The staircase groaned under Daniel's weight as he climbed, one slow step at a time. Each board beneath his boots let out a long, tired creak, as if the hotel itself was sighing in its sleep. The air grew heavier with every step, filled with the faint scent of candle wax and something older, something forgotten. Halfway up, he stopped to catch his breath. A tall window stood beside the staircase, its glass pale and fogged from the night outside. He wiped it gently with his hand, but the view beyond was only mist, a swirling white emptiness that swallowed everything. He shivered. The building was strangely quiet. No humming of electricity, no footsteps, no voices, only the faint ticking of a distant clock. It was an old silence, not empty but filled, like it carried the weight of all who had ever stayed there. At the top of the stairs, a hallway stretched ahead, long, narrow, and dimly lit by a row of small candles placed on the floor. Their flames flickered gently, throwing trembling shadows across the walls. A soft red carpet lined the floor, worn and faded from years of footsteps that had long since stopped walking. Daniel's eyes moved over the room numbers. 5, 6, 7, 8. And finally, at the very end, 9. His room. But before going in, he turned and looked back down the stairs. The lobby below seemed even darker now. From his angle, he could barely make out the old man behind the counter, sitting perfectly still, staring at the same candle that had been burning when Daniel arrived. He was about to call out a polite, "Good night," but something made him stop. The old man's head turned slightly, too slowly, as if he had already sensed Daniel's gaze. For a split second, their eyes met across the distance. Then the old man smiled faintly and nodded once. Daniel hesitated, nodded back, and quickly unlocked the door to room 9. The key turned smoothly, though the lock looked ancient. As the door creaked open, a faint gust of cool air brushed past his face, the smell of dust and faded perfume lingering within. He stepped inside. The room was surprisingly neat. A single bed stood near the center, covered with a soft, pale blanket. A candle burned quietly on a small wooden table beside it, its light revealing cracked wallpaper and a painting hanging crooked on the wall. The painting showed a calm lake under a full moon, peaceful, but something about it felt almost too still, as if the water in the picture might suddenly ripple. Daniel set his bag down and sat on the edge of the bed. The mattress sank gently under his weight. He ran his hands through his hair, still thinking about the old man's strange words downstairs. Don't wake too soon. What could that even mean? Maybe it was just an old saying. Maybe he was just tired. Still, the thought wouldn't leave him. His gaze wandered to the nightstand. There was an old leather-bound guestbook placed neatly beside the candle. The pages were yellow and smelled faintly of smoke. He opened it slowly, expecting to see names and dates, but what he found made him pause. The entries were written in beautiful, looping handwriting. But all the names were crossed out. Every single one, some with thick ink lines, others scratched so hard that the paper had torn. At the very bottom of the page, fresh ink glistened under the candlelight. A new name had just been added. It read, Daniel Ward, room 9. His heart skipped. He hadn't signed anything. He hadn't even told the man his full name. He quickly turned the page, blank. Another, blank. Then, on the last one, faint words etched in pencil. They sleep, and they never wake. A sudden chill crawled up his spine. He closed the book and pushed it aside. The candle flame flickered violently for a moment, then steadied again. He told himself it was just nerves, maybe he was imagining things. He needed rest. Tomorrow, he'd walk to the next town and call for help. He blew out the candle, leaving only the pale moonlight sneaking through the curtains. The room felt strangely heavier now, like the air itself was waiting. He lay down slowly, pulling the blanket over himself. The silence was thick, pressing against his ears. For a moment, he could almost hear his heartbeat echoing in the walls. Then, a faint sound. A creak, slow and careful, from somewhere near the door. Daniel opened his eyes. The moonlight glimmered across the floorboards. Nothing. Just the shadows shifting gently, like waves on dark water. He let out a long sigh and closed his eyes again. Sleep began to pull at him, soft and slow. But as his thoughts began to fade, he heard it. A whisper, delicate and close to his ear. Rest well, Daniel. His eyes flew open, but there was no one there. Only the candle's faint smoke curling in the dark. And the echo of a voice that shouldn't have known his name. Night deepened like ink poured across the sky. Inside room 9, the silence had shape, thick, living, watchful. Daniel lay awake, staring at the ceiling, listening to the faint crackle of the candle beside his bed. He should have been asleep by now. But something about the room refused to let him drift. Each breath felt too loud, each heartbeat too heavy. The shadows in the corners seemed to pulse with his breathing. He turned on his side. The candlelight trembled, bending as if moved by invisible air. For a moment he thought he saw someone's reflection in the glass of the painting, a dark blur standing near the foot of the bed. He blinked, and it was gone. Outside, a low wind sighed through the cracks of the old window. The curtains moved slightly, brushing against the sill like gentle fingers. From somewhere far below, maybe the lobby, came the soft tick-tock of that same old clock he'd heard earlier. Steady, patient, counting the seconds until something. Daniel exhaled and tried to calm himself. It's just an old building, he whispered. Old buildings make noises. Still, his voice sounded strange in the quiet, too clear, as though the room were listening. He reached for the candle to add another piece of wax, but the flame flickered wildly. It rose high for a heartbeat, then shrank until it was only a small trembling spark. The walls seemed to draw closer, their shadows stretching long and thin. And then he heard it. A whisper, so faint that it might have been the sound of breath. Don't fall asleep. Daniel froze. The words brushed against his ear, cold and close, but when he turned, no one was there. Only the dark, and the candle fighting to stay alive. He sat up quickly, his chest tight. Hello, he called. No answer. He forced a laugh that didn't sound like his own. Very funny, he said to the empty room. But even his whisper came back to him softer, distorted, as if someone else repeated it a second later. The air felt colder now. He rubbed his arms, but his skin prickled with goosebumps. Something moved behind him, a quiet creak, like footsteps on old wood. He spun around. Nothing. The candle gave one last flicker, then went out. Darkness swallowed everything. For several long seconds, there was no sound at all. Only the rhythm of his breathing and the steady thump of his heart. He reached out blindly toward the nightstand, searching for his phone, but his hand met only the smooth surface of the table, empty. He could feel the open guestbook beneath his fingertips. He pulled his hand back quickly. A faint glow appeared near the wall, pale and bluish, almost like moonlight. It shimmered and moved slowly, shaping itself into something human. A woman, or the memory of one, stood at the far side of the room. Her outline was soft, transparent, her face hidden by long, drifting hair. Daniel tried to speak, but his throat locked. The figure lifted a hand and pointed toward the bed. Her voice, when it came, was like a breath across glass. They sleep here, and never wake. The words barely formed before the light dimmed and vanished. The silence returned, heavier than before. Daniel stumbled back, his heart hammering. He grabbed his bag and moved toward the door. The handle turned easily, too easily, and the door swung open. The hallway outside was completely dark except for the faint glow of the candles on the floor. But as he stepped out, he realized the flames were no longer real fire. They were blue, cold, unmoving, like frozen light. Every door along the corridor was open now. Inside each room, he could just make out the shape of someone lying on the bed, still, peaceful, silent. A chill slid through him. He wanted to run, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly, every step echoing louder, slower. The air grew thick, heavy with the scent of old wax and dust. Then, from the darkness ahead, came the sound of soft humming. The same melody he'd heard faintly in the lobby. And there, sitting behind the front counter, was the old man, waiting, candle before him still burning steady. Daniel reached the bottom of the stairs, panting. Who are you? He demanded. What is this place? The old man looked up, his eyes calm, almost kind. You wanted rest, he said softly. And rest you shall have. Daniel shook his head. No, I'm leaving. The old man smiled, the faintest curve of his lips. You already did. Before Daniel could reply, the world tilted. The walls faded into mist. The floor dissolved beneath him like smoke. He felt weightless, falling, floating, dreaming. When he opened his eyes again, the candlelight was back. He was lying in the bed. The blanket pulled neatly to his chest. The air was still, peaceful. Down in the lobby, the old man reached for the guestbook. He turned a fresh page and dipped his pen in ink. Under the heading Guests Who Sleep, he wrote a new name in slow, graceful letters. Daniel Ward, Room 9. He closed the book gently and blew out the candle. A small curl of smoke rose, twisting upward into the dark. Outside, the wooden sign swayed in the wind, its letters glowing faintly under the moonlight. Hotel of Sleep. And far away, on the empty road that led to nowhere, the fog began to close once more. Waiting for the next traveler who would lose his way.